I think we're on. Good. Good morning. This beautiful Sabbath day, and we're happy to welcome you back to this morning's presentation by Dr. Arlene Taylor, who has started a series of presentations last night. Some of you were here last night, so a different topic this morning on cellular memory, past, present, and future. Kind of interested to see how she's going to have future memory in there, but we'll never know. We never know. She's got always new and interesting stuff. I think the takeaway I had from last night that I had never heard before was the fact that you cannot have gratitude functioning in the brain and fear at the same time. And I was just thinking, man, what a neat idea. I mean, that's a practical, everyday thing you can use. So when you're starting to have that idea of fear coming on, start the gratitudes going. Start the thankfulness going. Start thinking of the things that you could be thankful for, and before you know it, your fears will be gone. And Dr. Taylor was sharing with me her own personal experience with that recently, of using that technique for herself. So we want to give her as much time as she can for this morning's presentation, and we'll do a little bit more kind of that formal introduction stuff later on today. So, Arlene, you're on.
You can skip the formal introduction. So, good morning. How in the health are you? Good. I have to be very careful how I say that, because remember, I'm a minister's kid, and so they're going to expect something entirely different. I said that the other day to quite a large group, and a man said, "What did you say?" And I thought, whoops, he didn't get it. All right, cellular memory. How many of you have heard the term cellular memory? A few of you, all right. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, since we are now learning about the science of epigenetics. So I'm going to go very quickly so that I quit on time. The doctor here threatened me within an inch of my existence if I go over, so. The slides are all on my website, last time I checked. And so you can, don't feel like you have to take notes, just sit back and let the information soak into your brain. And I should mention that there's plenty of room on the sides to stand. So if you have the kind of brain that learns best when you're standing, and that's 50% of people, then anytime you want to, get up and stand. If I had my way in education, every schoolroom would have half sitting and half standing desks, and kids could alternate. Because some kids really don't learn unless they're standing. I don't know about you, but when I went to school, I was told to sit down, shut up, and be still. And that doesn't work for 50% of brains. All right, let's go. I want to start with brain benders. These are brain aerobic exercises to boot your brain up, just in case you haven't booted it up yet this morning, like you would boot up a computer. Each little box is its own puzzle. With the left brain, you're reading the letters and the words. With your right hemisphere, you're looking at the position, whether they're going forwards or backwards, where they are in the box, and so on and so forth. And so you come up with some little phrase. And there's no right or wrong answers, because these are just what my brain thought of. So, top left, the word is riding. So, exactly, riding low. I think about that. I was lecturing at a high school the other day, and believe me, some of the male species had clothes on that were riding low. Second on the left. Oh, well, we can do the right then. Crying shame is absolutely correct. If you want to go back and forth, we'll go back and forth. All right, now let's try this one. Second on the left. Remember, the brain doesn't care if the letters go forwards or backwards. T tax, tax on T. Good job. All right, what about this one? Second on the right. The word is foursquare. There you go. The word is square, and there's 4 of them. You're good for this time of the morning. Third on the left. Doesn't add up. Brilliant. It's rare someone has the nerve to say that, you know. The other day I heard somebody whispering, you know, it's been a long time since I had algebra. It's not algebra. It's just wrong. Doesn't add up. Third on the right. Annual checkup. Good job. Fourth on the left. Well, there's a double there, but the double isn't the face. Yes, face up to it. Excellent. And bottom right. Get on top of it, get over it, either way. And we'll talk about that this afternoon. Good job. I think the only time I saw a group do it faster than that was when I was lecturing in a penitentiary for all male prisoners. And you think I'm kidding. You know, I can't take time to tell you, but it was a very scary experience. By the time I got into the actual cell block, I had very few things left on me except my actual clothes. And they told me, you walk down Main Street, look neither to the right nor the left, do not smile, do not talk to anybody. And I'm thinking, what am I doing in here? So we got to the room about this big, and at 7 p.m. they opened the cells to the prisoners who'd signed up to come and hear me speak, and here they start coming in. And they just walked in and sat down and stared at me, and I'm sitting up in front, and I'm thinking again, what am I doing here? How am I going to relate to these people? They're not talking, they're not smiling, they're just lumps on their chairs. And sometimes I hear myself saying things that I was thinking but had no intention of saying. I don't know if that happens to any of you. But I stood up and I said, this is my first experience actually lecturing in a penitentiary. My books and DVDs are in several penitentiaries, but I personally have not been in one yet. It sort of puts a different spin on the words captive audience. Dead silence. I thought, now where do I go? There was a guy in the middle, big man, bright red hair and beards. And all of a sudden, he slapped his leg, sounded like a cannon going off, and he said, that was funny. Looks around, he says, guys, she's going to be okay. So he started doing brain benders, and I'm not kidding. As fast as I moved to the next one, there were 2 or 3 answers, just boom, 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 boom. And when we were done, I said, you know, that took 17 seconds. I've never, ever talked to an audience that did brain benders that quickly. The redhead goes, well, Dr. Taylor, just because we're in here doesn't mean we're stupid. And somebody else says, oh, yes, it does. I had an interesting time. So you probably were second fastest, and you're not incarcerated. All right, human beings, we're a product, a unique combination of nature and nurture, and I'm sure you've heard those 2 terms. We'll talk about them briefly. They really relate to what researchers called building blocks in the cell. And of course, we're used to genes and chromosomes transmitting information from generation to generation, but now we know that there are other building blocks that do not involve genes and chromosomes. And that has turned into the science of epigenetics. This part with genes and chromosomes is genetics. So we'll talk about both of those this morning. So the nature part, just a refresher from biology, high school, in case you have forgotten where you came from. So nature is your inherited genetic characteristics that are found in those 46 chromosomes. And probably around 25,000, maybe 30,000 genes on those chromosomes. DNA, you know that term, deoxyribonucleic acid, which really contains the blueprint. 99% of all of it in your body is believed to occur in those chromosomes. So genetics is the study of what you inherit from your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents and your great-great-grandparents, and we don't know for sure how far back. And specifically related to genes and chromosomes. It's called the human genome. Now, in the late 1800s, when I was studying at Loma Linda University, we were told that there was going to be at least 300,000 genes identified. It's probably more like 1/10 of those. But epigenetics explains now a lot about how with that few genes, we get billions of people, no two are ever identical, even identical twins. So you know that a chromosome, some of you remember the double helix, the awards that were given from the scientists that discovered that. So chromosome is a single piece of coiled DNA. So there's a chromosome. And that's the blueprint for how you were built. You inherit all of your chromosomal DNA from both parents. Remember that. So 99% of everything you got some from your father and some from your mother. So there's the 46 chromosomes that I think are kind of fun to look at. Pairs 1 to 22 are numbered by size and appearance, and usually they're the same in males and females. And then you've got this 23rd pair, the X and the Y. And I sometimes have fun with that when I'm talking to young people. Because, pop this slide up, I was talking at a university and one young man said, "Dr. Taylor, don't you have those backwards?" And I looked to see if I did, and I said, "No, they're not backwards. What are you referring to?" "Well," he says, that pathetic little Y, that can't be right. I mean, the Y can't be that tiny. I mean, big is better. And look at the X." And I thought, well, that's an interesting perspective. And then we talked about the ovum being the largest human cell and the sperm being the smallest cell, and he really was having difficulty with that concept. And so it makes lecturing so much fun. Now, DNA. 99% of it is where? In your chromosomes. Don't everybody answer at once. I might think you learned it. So, think of DNA as its own separate alphabet, which I find fascinating. Last night we talked about a musical alphabet, and a language, word alphabet. Well, DNA consists of a 64-letter alphabet. How many are in the English language? 26. Good. Thank you. All right, this one's 64. And it spells out the genetic code. So the letters, these 64 letters, are arranged in words and sentences, and that's what we call genes. So here you've got that chromosomal pattern, and then here you've got all of the genes made up of different arrangements of those 64 letters. And it looks like, from all the work that's being done now, we might have as many as 30,000 genes, but far fewer than were ever thought. Now, each of our DNA contains what we call mutations, meaning when the cells divide and multiply, they don't always do it exactly the same. And you'll come up with a misspelling in the DNA. One of these 64 letters will be maybe reversed out of sequence, and that can make a whole difference. It's like trying to look something up on the computer, and you type in the URL, and you've got 2 letters, backwards, and what happens? It says, can't find it, unavailable. So you've got mutations in your DNA. A lot of them are not very harmful. They're just mutations. But some of them now are being definitely tied to all kinds of conditions. One of them is sickle cell anemia that's caused by a change in one single gene of those 25 to 30,000 genes. It's amazing. One mutation in one gene can cause sickle cell anemia. I'm just trying to remind you where most of your DNA is. 1% of your DNA is in what's called your mitochondria. I don't know if you know that term. Mitochondria, this is a drawing of a cell, and you see these little orange rod-shaped organelles. Those are mitochondria, and that's where you get energy. Those little things translate, convert everything you eat and drink and so on into energy. Now, mutations accumulate in your mitochondrial DNA much faster than they do in your chromosomal DNA. It seems to be a much more unstable type of DNA. And the mutations seem to accumulate. It hangs on to them. So eventually over time, when you look at your mitochondrial DNA, you see more and more and more mutations. And as I said, this is just amazing that one mutation can cause something as huge as sickle cell anemia. You get your chromosomal DNA, some from your mother, some from your father. But you get all of your mitochondrial DNA from your mother, which is fascinating. And that's what's made it possible for you to, order a DNA kit, and they'll send it to you with a little swab, and you stick it in your mouth and swab it around on the inside of your facial cheek and send it back to them. And then they start comparing your DNA patterns with all of the millions of patterns they've accumulated, and they go back until all of a sudden they don't see the mutations in your mitochondrial DNA. And that's the beginning of your specific line. And now they look for other people who have the same type of mitochondrial mutations, and that's probably who you're related to fairly closely. So I did that a couple of years ago. It's been great fun. I've gotten a dozen or so emails from people around the world saying, my DNA mutations match yours. I think I'm your third cousin or your second cousin or something like that. Now, so far, I've never invited anybody over, but it's interesting. And I'm going to Australia in about 10 days, and there's somebody over in Australia whose DNA is really close to mine. In fact, he's got the same last name as my mother, Cafferkey. So I may look him up and see what he looks like and what he can tell me about the family and so on. Okay. Now, that was all nature. Now let's go to nurture. Nurture is how the environment acts upon nature, upon those genes and chromosomes. What does the environment have to do with those? And this has become the science of epigenetics. And it involves 2 clear things. It involves how epigenetics changes those genes. It can turn them on, it can turn them off. It can make part of one express itself and part of one just sit there dormant, which is one of the reasons we're all so different. So it involves the ability to stimulate or suppress gene expression, but it also is the study of the transmission of information from the cell of one of your ancestors to you. No genes or chromosomes involved. And at first, people thought this was science fiction. Well, it's probably more complex than science fiction. It has determined that in addition to its effects on the genes themselves, it can influence, modify strands of protein in the cell nucleus. Specifically, nutrition, stress, and emotions are really clear that they can be transmitted from generation to generation, which I think explains the reason in Scripture that things seem to run in generations in terms of behaviors, and we were pretty sure that wasn't genes and chromosomes. So you may remember, for example, that Abraham married his half-sister Sarah, who apparently was gorgeous. And as they were traveling around, he was afraid that somebody would just knock him off to grab his beautiful wife. So what did he tell them? He says, Sarah's my sister. Okay, was that the truth? Yeah, it was the truth. But the implications were that they weren't married. That backfired. And he had some interesting scrapes to get out of to keep Sarah from being added to the king's harem. Well, then later on, he has Isaac. And Isaac married Rebekah, who apparently was very beautiful. And as they're traveling around, what does Isaac do? Same thing his father did. Not because of genes and chromosomes, but probably because of cellular memory. So cellular memory has become sort of the working label for epigenetics. And it describes this non-declarative memory. What does that mean? You know, there's several kinds of memory. Declarative, non-declarative, and intelligent. And by the way, intelligent memory keeps growing and expanding and getting better as you get older. And intelligent memory has to do with problem solving and linking things together because of this, then that. So keep building your intelligent memory. Declarative memory means that you know some specific fact and you can declare it. For example, I'm very clear about how old I am and when I was born. I don't choose to declare it, but I know it. And I can declare my name. My name is Arlene Taylor. Non-declarative memory has to do with behaviors. You get a push toward a behavior. You have no idea where it came from. And you can't really describe it. You know, you may be able to ride a bicycle, but you could not tell somebody exactly what happens in your brain and body to allow you to ride a bicycle. That's non-declarative memory. You know how to do it, but you can't declare to somebody exactly how you do it. And this declarative memory, I think I showed you that, but I didn't point it out. See, here's the double helix pattern, but here are the protein strands that float around in the cell nucleus. In every cell it has a nucleus, and it appears that this cellular generational memory is encoded on those strands of protein. And when the cells multiply and divide, it gets passed on. So Dr. Lowe said he wasn't exactly sure how you pass on cellular memory to the future, and I know he was just being smart. For example, when a woman is pregnant with a female child, she has her own cellular memory. She has passed that on to her daughter. But when that girl child is born, she has all the eggs, all the ovum she will ever have, and cellular memory has already gone into that. So you're looking at right there, 2 generations forward. So it's really important how mothers take care of themselves during pregnancy. And it's even more important that when you decide you want to have children, you are really careful about who you have as the other parent of your children, because they're going to get cellular memory. So it's important to understand what's the family like, because they're going to be raising your kids too. And they're going to be passing on their cellular memory. And sometimes we make really poor choices, and then our children have all kinds of problems, and we wonder, how did that happen? Well, duh, look who you married, and look what your cellular memory is like. So, unfortunately, we don't always seem to get a lot wiser with each generation. So red blood cells don't have any nucleus, so when you have a blood transfusion, you won't be passing on cellular memory with any of the red blood cells. If you have one that has white blood cells in, you have that potential. So researchers think that minimum, you have cellular memory from up to 4 generations ahead of you, behind you, whichever way you're looking, and you can pass it on for at least 3 or 4 generations. You know, the Bible's really clear about unto the 3rd and 4th generation, and it may be more than that. So epigenetic memories help us to explain all kinds of things. The way that certain behavioral and disease patterns show up in a family line. You know, some families have a lot of heart trouble but very little cancer. Some have a lot of cancer but very little neurological disease, and so on. And you wonder, how come this is showing up differently in families? Maybe some genetic component for the strength of the immune system, but certainly epigenetics will impact that. I was lecturing back east. You know, the same 2 parents can have 5 children or 12 or 2, and they'll be different. They'll not only look different, but they'll behave differently, even if they're raised in the same environment. And people adopt children at birth, and they think they're going to act like their own biological children do. I mean, we're raising them the same way, and it doesn't happen, and they get kind of flummoxed. I was lecturing back east in I think it was a Methodist church, and was talking about cellular memory. And after the service, this couple came up to me with tears on their cheeks. And I thought, oh my goodness, what happened? You know, did I say something that I should have phrased differently? So we sat down, and the man said to him, I'm the minister at the Methodist church in the next city. He said, we couldn't have children biologically of our own. So my wife and I adopted a little baby girl from a 15-year-old woman who was unwed and knew she couldn't raise the child. He said, we gave her the best of everything we could possibly give her. And when she turned 15, she got pregnant. And the church nearly threw me out of the church. They said, what kind of pastor are you? I mean, your daughter, she's 15, she's pregnant, she's not married. How did you raise her? And he said, we raised her to the best of our ability, and we didn't realize till we heard this presentation what probably happened. He said, we know that her mother got pregnant unwed when she was 15. We know that the girl's mother's mother did the same thing. He said, if we'd understood this, we would have said to her, as she started to get older, you know, you're the 3rd generation that had a child out of wedlock at the age of 15. When you approach the age of 15, you're going to feel a push toward engaging in sexual activity and perhaps even thinking about getting pregnant. You can either continue that pattern, or we'll help you break that pattern and create new cellular memory for yourself. But he said we didn't know. And I thought, boy, that's too bad, isn't it? Congregation who'd had him be the minister for 18 years, child gets pregnant, it's not the end of the world. And they're blaming the parents for not having a decent upbringing. You know, we got to stop rushing to judgment, because it really was hard on them. And the same thing happens. I have friends who took in foster children and kept them a long time, and several of them just turned out beautifully, and one of them, you know, was sent to jail when he was 19, and they go, we raised them all the same. Yeah, but they came to you with different cellular memory. So how do you get it? First of all, it can be donated to you. And the first way it's donated to you is from your parents. And then after you're born, you start building your own cellular memory. So you not only have what was passed on to you, but what you're developing, both of which you can pass on to your biological children. What your biological ancestors did, what they ate, their occupation, all kinds of things are filed on those protein strands as behaviors. I'll give you one example in my life. From the time I could remember, if I ever saw people tap dancing or watched some tap dancing on television, I promise you every cell in my body started to jiggle. And I wanted to learn to tap dance. Of course, my father, as the preacher, thought that that probably would not be very good for the minister's daughter to do. It would be bad enough to chew gum, but tap dancing? So I never tap danced. My parents came over for dinner once, well, lots of times, but this particular time, about the time I must have been 50. And I married a man who had 3 little boys. They were ages 1, 2, and 3, and he had custody of them, so I became an instant stepmother of 3. I'm not recommending that, I'm just telling you what I did. It was good for me, but it was a stretch. So they were out in the family room watching television, and you know, one of my favorite, I can't remember his name now, but one of my favorite long, tall, drink of water tap dancers came on. They knew I loved tap dancing. So the youngest one runs into the kitchen and says, Mom, come, tap dancing's on the television. And I said to my father, here, stir the spaghetti. I want to go watch this. So I watched a little bit of it, and I just made me want to do it. I'm 50. So I came back to the kitchen, and I said, you know, that is so strange. Said to my parents, from the time I can remember, I've wanted to tap dance. You wouldn't let me as a child, and I just got too busy to learn as an adult, but where does that come from? And my mother, who barely disclosed her middle name, says to me, well, that's not a stretch, Arlene. I said, what do you mean? She says, I was champion tap dancer all the way through high school in Regina, Saskatchewan. I said, what? Oh yeah, she said, I was a great tap dancer. And I'm thinking, cellular memory from tap dancing? And then she said, not only that, but when I was pregnant with you, and we lived in Calgary, and it was very cold, I really couldn't get out and do much exercise. And so till about the 8th month of pregnancy, my exercise was tap dancing up and down the hall. I have not only cellular memory from tap dancing, I built cellular memory while she was jiggling me around. And it was just amazing to learn that. I mean, it came from somewhere, and I never knew where it came from before that. So I says to her, so what else don't I know? But she didn't come up with anything else, so who knows what it was. So the other way you can get cellular memory is if you have an organ transplant, because that organ comes to you, monkey, pig, or person, with cellular memory built in those cells. And there are entire books written about this now. You know, early in my nursing career, nobody talked about that. In fact, some of the surgeons said to me, well, we were pretty sure something was happening. We didn't know what, but we're certainly not going to tell somebody that. They might not want the transplant. So there's entire books written about how the recipients are actually dreaming about the donor and what the donor did, even if they don't know who the donor is. They're just having these dreams. And their food tastes can change, and the kind of music they want to listen to can change. I had a personal experience with that in Australia. I was talking about cellular memory, and this woman came up to me at the break, and she said, whatever you do, don't leave tonight until I talk to you. I said, okay. I'm thinking, why isn't she talking to me now? She said, I have to go and call my brother and apologize because I was rude to him tonight. So I thought, well, that's worth sticking around for a story. So she came to me after and she said, so it was 6 o'clock tonight and the phone rang and it was my brother on the phone and he says, sis, how do I eat spaghetti? And she says, I don't have time for trivia questions. I'm going to hear some woman from the States talk about the body and the brain. I'll talk to you later. No, he says, you need to talk to me now. How do I eat spaghetti? She says, you put a pile of spaghetti on your plate and you take your knife and fork and you cut it into 1/2-inch lengths and then you shovel it in. Can I go now? No. How do you eat spaghetti? She said, this is ridiculous. You know how I eat spaghetti. I take a spoon and I twirl the spaghetti in it with a fork and shove it in my mouth. Now can I go? Oh, he says, something really weird happened to me just a few minutes ago. He said, tonight's the first night my wife has fixed me spaghetti for months. He said, I sat down at the table. There's my plate of spaghetti. There's a knife and a fork. And I kept looking at it, and I said, hon, something's missing. She goes, nothing's missing. That's all you need, your plate of spaghetti and a knife and a fork. No, he says, something's missing. Well, she says, I don't know what it is. So he says, I got up and I started walking around the kitchen. I didn't know what I'm looking for. He started pulling drawers open. Said I pulled the silverware drawer open and saw this nice big soup spoon. And I said, that's what's missing, my soup spoon. She says, you never use a soup spoon when you eat spaghetti. Well, he says, somehow I need to use it tonight. And he says, I sat down at the table and I picked up the spoon and I started twirling spaghetti in the spoon, looked down what I was doing and dropped everything and about knocked my chair over. He said, my whole life I've never done that. And the lady says, well, 3 months ago, I gave him one of my kidneys because both of his failed. And even his behavior about eating spaghetti had changed. And people think that that's just can't happen. Happens all the time. Now, what happens when you lose some cells for which you have built cellular memory? Now, this is a little weird, I'll grant you. My mother's mother was French. Didn't speak English till she was almost 15. One of 13 children, didn't have shoes. I think I have cellular memory from her for not wearing shoes, because I never wear shoes if I possibly can take them off. Of course, that does disconcert a few people. It did my father. First time he heard me make a presentation and my shoes were off, he came up and he goes, Arlene, please tell me that I didn't see it right and that you did have shoes on. I said, no, I didn't have shoes on, Dad. Well, how come? Because I don't care how comfortable they are. I'm thinking about them if I have my feet in shoes, and people don't care about my feet, they care about my brain. So I just leave my shoes off. Oh, he says, I just think that's totally inappropriate. So every time he heard me speak, we'd have the same discussion. My definition of insanity, you know. Same thing happening, expecting a different outcome. I still take my shoes off. Fortunately, it does not bother Dr. Lowe. So months go by, several years go by, I'm still getting the same sermon from my father. And one Sunday morning, I waked up like 5 o'clock in the morning, which is really early for me, almost never happens unless I'm flying somewhere on a plane. Some of you are listening. So I dialed my father on the phone and I said, morning, Dad. And I could just see him. He went, Arlene, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. What's wrong? You've never called me at 5 o'clock in the morning in your whole life. I said, I know, Dad, but I woke up at 5 o'clock this morning and I suddenly have it. I know the reason you can stop giving me the no shoes lecture. And it's scriptural. He goes, really? All right, what do you think you have? I said, well, Dad, God told Moses to take his shoes off because it was holy ground. If it's good enough for Moses, it's good enough for me. He goes, all right, I'll concede you that one. And he never gave me the lecture again. So my little French grandmother, I loved her to distraction. Didn't see her too often because we lived a long way away, but she was plump and soft and cuddly. My mother was not particularly a hugger. Boy, my grandmother was. And she smelled faintly of lavender and baby powder. I mean, it's all in my brain. So she'd come to visit, and the first thing she'd say is, well, what would you like to do, Arlene? And I'd go, read to me, Grammy. So we'd sit down on the sofa, you know, one of those old-fashioned wine-colored tufted patterns on the sofa, and she'd put her arm around me, and she'd read with her little French accented voice. And as she read to me, with her arm that was around me, she would stroke my face right in front of my ear, hold the book in the left hand, and just stroke my face. It's weird. I can tell you that my grandmother used to smell of lavender and baby powder and stroke my face, and I have that memory. But when I stroke those cells, I smell the lavender and the baby powder. Now, what would happen, do you think, if I have a facelift and they cut out that ½ inch? I don't plan on having a facelift, so get used to the wrinkles. But what would happen if I did? Would I lose, you know, because if I stroke my nose or stroke my forehead, I don't get any smell of lavender and baby powder. So if they cut those cells out, would I lose that cellular memory? I'm probably not going to be willing to risk that. So we develop cellular memory from the moment the egg and the sperm connect and we become a fetus. And certainly what happens during pregnancy to the mother impacts the fetus. Researchers believe that a fetus knows, number one, whether it was wanted or not wanted. It knows whether it's the right gender. And I also have a sense of that. You know, my mother was left in an orphanage when she was 5, so she was not excited about having children because she didn't have a wonderful childhood. But my father, the preacher, wanted a child. He finally said to her, according to my mother's older sister, you know, Kathleen, I think I could understand the love of God better if I had my own child. I really want a child. And my mother did not want to get pregnant. She was terrified of delivery. And so this went on. They were married for several years. And finally, one day, my mother got tired of listening to him. You remember, he could be very persistent, the shoes. And so my mother said, all right, Warren, I'll get pregnant. It's going to be a boy. It'll be born on your birthday, and I'm done. One's enough. She forgot to tell me. I wasn't born on his birthday. I was 5 days late. And I wasn't a boy. I was a girl. And the first thing I remember is my mother saying, oh, for pity's sake, I'm going to have to do this again. Because she really wanted a boy. Thank heavens that she didn't have 12 girls like our neighbors before she got a boy. He was the second one. So I sensed that I was supposed to be a boy, and I wasn't. And I didn't feel terribly good. And then, 4 years later, this adorable little boy is born who looks just like my mother. I look like my father. Don't look like my mother, but he looked like my mother, and she was pretty good looking. Curly hair, huge blue eyes. And I remember someone coming to visit him and saying, well, Warren, you finally have somebody to carry on the family name. And I'm going, what's this noise? Family name. So I says to him, what do you mean, carry on the family name? What does that mean? And he goes, well, the family name is Taylor. And boys will carry on the Taylor name. When you get married, you'll take your husband's name, and you won't be a Taylor anymore. 4 years old, and I said to him, I don't think so. You gave me the name Taylor, I'm keeping it. He goes, well, you'll change it when you get married. And I said, So I kept it as my professional name because that made such a huge impression on me. Then I found out when I was doing my first doctorate, well, there aren't very many men who embrace that, willingly. They want you to take their name so they can prove that you belong to them, I guess. When I was doing my first PhD, I found that up until the 17th century, women always kept their own name. And then England passed this interesting law that as of such and such a date, women had to take their husband's name and the children had to take the father's name so that, they knew who everybody belonged to. So it's refreshing to me when I meet a man who knows that your name is your name is your name. They don't very often want to give up their name. In fact, I broke up with a couple of guys because, they were nice enough, but I said to them when they started talking about marriage, well, okay, are you willing to take the name Taylor? One of them looked at me and said, are you nuts? And I said, no, we just had our last date. I don't care that I never insisted they take my name, but come on, just the thought of doing it was so egregious to him, I thought, I wonder what else is going to be egregious to him. So he's history. So any illnesses you have, I apologize for using my own experience, but that's what I know best. 5 months pregnant with me, my mother and father went out to eat in a restaurant, and she got fried chicken. That's before we understood more about longevity. And she got a terrible, terrible case of food poisoning. She was in the hospital for weeks. They were sure she was going to miscarry. She didn't. She lived. But she said, I'm not eating meat of any kind anymore. That was just too awful. I didn't know that story. I'm 25 and I have all kinds of allergies. Although she raised me as a vegetarian, I wasn't eating meat, but I had all kinds of allergies. So I went to have allergy testing. And they stick those needles in you and you have all these little chicken pox lumps all over you. It's not a pretty thing. There's got to be a better way to do that. Someone will come up with it. And the doctor says to me, so let's check you for meat. I said, I don't eat meat. Oh, he says, well, check anyway. He says, we'll check you for chicken and pork and beef and, something else. The little injection for chicken blew up so my arm was almost twice its size. And I went back to the doctor thinking, I was dying. And he goes, well, that's the chicken allergen. He said, you told me you were a vegetarian. I said, I am. I've never eaten chicken that I know of. Well, he says, your body doesn't like it. So I called my aunt because she was more of a fount of information. And I explained to her what happened. She says, oh, that's not surprising. Your mother was in the hospital for weeks with chicken food poisoning when she was 5 months pregnant with you. My body remembered. Cellular memory from that really horrible event. So if your ancestors drank, if they had tobacco, so on and so forth, you would be likely to be born with a push toward using those substances. Or, especially in the case of a male fetus, if you took your first drink, you would almost like it immediately because you got cellular memory for it. And it's amazing. The son of an alcoholic who is removed from that alcoholic at birth and never has anything to do with the biological father has an 85% increased chance of becoming almost an immediate alcoholic with the first alcoholic drink because of cellular memory. So that's one reason it's so important to pay attention to the person who's going to be your spouse's parent of your children. Because what is it? Life is not all that easy, although I'm so glad I was born first or I wouldn't be here. But, you can predispose your children to have a little bit easier time of it or not such an easy time of it, depending on what happens. I'll tell you a couple more stories, and that's probably all the time we have. So my 3 sons. The middle son is who I call a saver. He was always for the underdog. Whoever was, being given a bad time, he would like to stand up for that person. That translated into his dating. So if there was a girl who was having a bad time, he'd ask her out and, often become quite attached to her. And that was a little worrisome for me. But you have to be careful what you say, because if you tell a saver child they're not good for you, they're going to prove you wrong. So one night he came home and he says, "Mom, I met a new girl." And my brain goes, "Oh, great, I wonder who he's saving this time." And I said, "Well, tell me about her." "Well," he says, "she's beautiful and she's smart. I want to bring her over for dinner." I said, "Fine, bring her over anytime you want." I says, "There's one problem." It's not really a problem, but you probably ought to know. Until 3 months ago, she was a heroin addict. I'm trying to keep my face straight. That is not a good thing. And I said, "Well, I'm glad she's cleaning herself up." And I thought, I got to be really careful what I say. So he brings her over, and she's a delightful girl. But, you can see behavioral characteristics that go along with, hardcore addictions. So I encouraged him, if he wanted to do something with her, to bring her to the house so that, it would be with the family. So this goes on for several months. One day he comes home and he goes, "Mom, I want to marry her." I said, "Remind me again how old you are." He goes, 17. I said, "Well, I can appreciate that right now you may want to marry her, but 5 years from now, the person you think you want to wake up next to every morning for the rest of your life may be very different, because your corpus callosum isn't even paved, and your prefrontal cortex won't be done until 27 or 28. So you might want to go slowly with this." A couple weeks go by, and he goes, "Mom, can you lend me some money?" And I said, "For what?" "I want to get an engagement ring for her." And I said, "Sorry, there's no available loans for an engagement ring. You're going to have to earn the money for the engagement ring." Well, he goes, "Maybe I better get a second job." I said, "Hey, it's up to you." So he gets a second job. He works for 6 months. All the money he had to buy an engagement ring, I had to get a magnifying glass to see the diamond, but nevertheless, he bought an engagement ring. So he comes home. He says, "I'm going to ask her to marry me next week on her birthday." And I said, "Well, I can't force you to make a different decision, but I will tell you I have a concern." "What?" I said, "Well, heroin addiction is extremely difficult to break and maintain. My second PhD had a emphasis in addictive behaviors and what it does to the brain and how you change them. And heroin addiction, habituation, whatever word you want to use, is ugly." And I said, "Supposing you marry her and you have 2 or 3 children and she relapses and you're at work, what would happen to the kids? Who's going to take care of the kids?" And you have to know that cellular memory for heroin addiction would be passed on us. And I said, "Well, I'm just throwing it out there because it would be awful to have a surprise." So I shut my mouth, prayed a lot, because it certainly was a new experience. I love people to get clean and change their lives, but I never thought about one of them becoming the mother of my grandchild. And I didn't like that idea so much, quite frankly. So 3 days later, he comes home, climbs up on the stool in the kitchen, and he sits there. I said, "Bad day?" "Yeah." "Well, you want to talk about it?" "I don't know." "Well, when you're ready, I'm ready to listen." "Okay." So he sits there for about an hour, and finally he says, "She relapsed last night." I said, "Really?" "Oh, how awful. You must feel terrible." He says, "Yeah, I do." "And you know, Mom," he says, "I just can't ask her to marry me." I wanted to go, "Yes," but I didn't. I said, "What's the reason?" "Well, Mom," he says, like it's his idea. "Mom," he says, "what if I was at work and she's got a couple kids and she relapses? Who's going to take care of the kids?" I said, "Boy, that's a good question. I'm really proud of the way you're thinking." And I was. I thought, well, I guess they do listen. So he didn't marry her. But those are really the moral, ethical, generational questions that are not easy to answer. And so the last one, suicide attempts. I was working with another brain function researcher, and we got together, and she said, "Oh, I have a story to tell you from last week. You will not believe this." I said, "I probably will, because I'm learning that nothing's impossible with the brain." Well, she said, this mother came to me, brought her 14-year-old son with her. Nice-looking young man. She brings him in, and she says, he tried to kill himself again yesterday. He's 14. He's tried to hang himself 11 times. She said, "I've taken him to every psychiatrist, every counselor, and nobody can figure out where he has this push to hang himself. Where did it come from?" We had just started learning about cellular memory, so the brain function specialist said to the mother, "Well, you know, behaviors like that don't come out of a vacuum." You know, that's where I learned that favorite phrase of mine, every pathology has an ecology. So, says to the mother, "Tell me about your pregnancy. Was this a wanted child? Was it an accident? How many children do you have? Talk to me about what happened during that pregnancy." And the boy is sitting there, been to umpteen specialists. The mother says, "No, he was very much wanted. It had taken me a while to get pregnant." She said, "I had a good pregnancy." She's talked about the first month, the second month. She said, "In the third month, my husband was transferred to another city, so we moved, and I took a job there as a substitute teacher. And you know, it was a good move. We enjoyed the city. My mother died, and in the fourth month of pregnancy, my father came to live with us because he was so distraught and he just wasn't doing well on his own." And then she stopped talking. And the brain researcher said, "The fourth month. Okay, what happened in the fifth month?" Silence. Finally, the mother says, We've never talked about with him what happened in the fifth month ever." Well, I said, the brain researcher says, "You better start talking about it now." Well, she says, "Here's what happened." She said, "One day I came home from school. I'd picked him up at the babysitter, hit the garage door opener, the door went up, and there was my father hanging dead from a rafter in the garage." At that moment, the 14-year-old boy jumped up and said, "That's it, that's it, that's it. My whole life I've been dreaming about hanging. I see somebody hanging. I didn't know who it was. I thought it's something I was supposed to do." He was in her uterus. He wasn't seeing anything, but just like the research shows, he was creating pictures of what had happened to the mother. And from that day to this, he's never once offered to try to kill himself because he had the information. So we've just scratched the surface. You can go to my website if you want to, and you can click on brain references, and underneath that, cellular memory. And you'll find lots of references about the research that's being done with that. So that's it for now, folks. We have a break, right, Doc? Would you like to say something? You know he does.
Thanks, Arlene. We'll have a break until 10:45 when our regular worship service begins. So if you need to take a break, do it. Stand up. We don't want you to be bottom dwellers any longer than you have to. And you want to get keep your vascular health going. So stand up, move around, stretch, go drink some water. It's a good time to get some water, and whatever else you need to do until we reassemble at 10:45.